The kitchen smelled of love, sacrifice, and smoked turkey. Fanny stood over the worn enameled stove, a wooden spoon in her hand, stirring a massive pot of collard greens. At 65, her hands told the story of her life, calloused and mapped with prominent veins from 40 years of pulling double shifts as an ER nurse at County General. But today, those hands moved with the graceful rhythm of a woman in her element. Sunday dinner wasn't just a meal. In Fanny's house, it was an institution. It was the glue that held her small family together. In the oven, a peach cobbler was bubbling, the scent of cinnamon and caramelized sugar wrapping around the savory aroma of the fried chicken resting on the counter. The soft, soulful hum of Aretha Franklin's gospel record played from a vintage radio by the window. Fanny hummed along, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. She wore a simple floral dress, her natural hair pulled back into a neat silver-streaked puff. She didn't need to dress to the nines in her own home, but she always made sure her table was fit for royalty. The royalty, in her eyes, was her son, Marcus. The heavy oak front door opened, followed by the familiar heavy thud of expensive leather shoes on the hardwood floor. "Fanny, girl, smells like heaven in here." Marcus's voice boomed before he even entered the kitchen. Fanny couldn't help the smile that split her face. She turned just in time to catch her son as he leaned down to kiss her cheek. Marcus was a striking man in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered. He wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit that looked like it cost more than Fanny's first car, and a heavy gold watch caught the afternoon light as he adjusted his cuffs. "You're late, Marcus," Fanny said, though there was no real bite to her words. "The chicken's been out of the grease for 20 minutes. I know, Ma. Business doesn't stop on Sundays, you know that," Marcus said smoothly, already reaching into his pocket as his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second before he silenced it. "Just closing a big deal. Real estate and crypto, Ma. It's the future." Fanny sighed, turning back to the stove. "The future is fine, baby, but it won't feed you today. Where are Keisha and the babies?" "They're pulling up now. Keisha took forever getting the kids dressed." He waved a dismissive hand, leaning against the counter, picking at a piece of crust from the chicken. A moment later, the front door opened again, and the house instantly filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of children. 7-year-old Maya and 5-year-old Trey ran into the kitchen like two tiny tornadoes, wrapping their arms around Fanny's waist. "Nana!" they screamed in unison. "Oh, look at my babies!" Fanny laughed, dropping the spoon to hug them tight. She kissed Trey's chubby cheeks and smoothed Maya's intricately braided hair. "Y'all hungry?" "Starving," Maya declared. Behind them stood Keisha. Fanny's daughter-in-law offered a tired smile. Keisha was a beautiful woman, but today there were dark circles under her eyes, barely concealed by makeup. She wore a simple, slightly faded sundress, a stark contrast to her husband's immaculate designer suit. Fanny's sharp eyes caught the difference instantly, just as she noticed the tension in Keisha's shoulders. "Hey, Mama Fanny," Keisha said softly, stepping in to help set the table. "Sit down, Keisha, honey. You look exhausted," Fanny gently scolded, taking the plates from her hands. "Let Marcus set the table." Marcus scoffed, barely looking up from his phone. "Come on, Ma. I'm waiting on a text from my broker." "Your broker ain't eating this chicken." "Grab the silverware," Fanny said, her voice dropping into that serious, no-nonsense register that brooked no argument. Marcus rolled his eyes, but complied. Dinner was a loud, vibrant affair, but beneath the surface, Fanny felt an invisible current of tension. She watched her son holding court at the head of the table, talking loudly about his latest investments and dropping names of wealthy clients. He spoke of millions like they were spare change. "I'm telling you, Keisha, give it 6 months and we'll be looking at that house in the gated community in Buckhead," Marcus boasted, taking a bite of greens. Keisha kept her eyes on her plate, her fork pushing a piece of chicken around. "Marcus, we need to fix the roof on the house we have right now before we talk about Buckhead." The man from the contracting company called again on Friday. The check bounced. The table went dead silent. Only the clinking of Trey's fork against his plate broke the quiet. Marcus's face hardened, a flash of genuine anger crossing his features before he plastered on a smooth, condescending smile. "It was a banking error, babe. Moving funds between accounts. I told you I handled it." "A banking error?" Fanny repeated slowly, her maternal instincts buzzing like a warning siren. She had worked too hard, scrubbed too many floors, and taken too many night shifts to raise a fool. She knew a lie when she heard one. Marcus, you're not messing around with those fast money schemes again, are you? Lord knows I didn't raise you to build a house on sand. Ma, please, don't start with the old school mentality, Marcus sighed dramatically, leaning back. You worked for a paycheck your whole life. I'm building wealth. Generational wealth. There's a difference. The sheer arrogance in his voice stung Fanny, but she swallowed her pride. She had raised him alone after his father walked out. She had poured every ounce of her soul into making sure he went to college, that he didn't become a statistic. If he was a little arrogant, she told herself, it was only because she had taught him to hold his head high. Just make sure your family is taken care of, Marcus, Fanny said quietly, reaching over to squeeze Keisha's hand. Keisha offered a small, grateful smile, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Fanny didn't push it further. It was Sunday after all. But as she watched her son check his phone for the 10th time, his leg bouncing nervously under the table, a cold seed of unease was planted in her gut. She just didn't know yet that the seed would soon bloom into a nightmare. Tuesday was Fanny's 65th birthday. It was a milestone, a day she had quietly looked forward to. She had officially retired the year before, but this birthday felt like the true beginning of her golden years. The morning started beautifully. Her phone rang nonstop with calls from the women at the church, her sisterhood. Sister Martha sang a slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, and Pastor Jenkins called to offer a prayer of blessing over her life. By mid-afternoon, the house was quiet. Fanny sat in her favorite floral armchair by the window, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. She kept glancing at the clock on the wall. 3 p.m. Marcus hadn't called. She tried to brush off the sting of disappointment. He's a busy man, she rationalized, tracing the rim of her teacup. He's building generational wealth. He probably has meetings. Yet a small, stubborn part of her heart ached. For 40 years, she had never missed a single birthday of his. Even when she was working back-to-back shifts, she always managed to bake him a cake, even if it was at 2 a.m. At 4:15 p.m., a heavy knock echoed through the house. Fanny stood up, smoothing her skirt, a smile finally breaking through. He made it, she thought, hurrying to the front door. But when she opened it, it wasn't her son. It was a delivery driver in a crisp uniform, holding a sleek midnight blue package tied with a thick gold ribbon. "Delivery for Ms. Fanny Washington," the driver said, holding out a digital pad. "That's me," Fanny said, her brow furrowing as she signed. She took the surprisingly heavy box and carried it to the kitchen island. It was stunning. The packaging felt like velvet. Fanny carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of gold silk, were 24 exquisite handcrafted chocolate truffles. They were dusted with edible gold, sea salt, and crushed nuts. They looked like jewels rather than food. It was a brand from a high-end boutique in New Orleans. She recognized the name from a magazine she'd seen at the doctor's office once. A box like this easily cost a few $100s. Tucked neatly inside the lid was a small, crisp white envelope. Fanny opened it. The message inside was typed, not handwritten. "Happy 65th birthday, Mom. Enjoy the sweets. Marcus." Fanny stared at the card. "No, I love you. No handwritten note. Just cold, printed ink." It felt transactional, like a corporate gift sent to a client. She touched one of the truffles. It was cold. "Lord, this boy," Fanny whispered to the empty kitchen, letting out a heavy sigh. She felt a profound wave of sadness wash over her. He had thrown money at the problem of his absence. She picked up one of the chocolates, bringing it close to her nose. It smelled rich, dark, and intoxicating. But as she looked at it, her practical mind took over. Her doctor had been very clear at her last checkup. Her blood pressure was creeping up, and her blood sugar wasn't what it used to be. "Ms. Fanny, you need to lay off the sweets," Dr. Evans had warned her. Besides, eating a whole box of decadent chocolates alone in an empty house felt depressing. Fanny smiled softly. She knew exactly who would appreciate these. Maya and Trey had a sweet tooth that rivaled anyone's. And Keisha, poor Keisha, looked like she needed a little sweetness in her life right now. Fanny didn't even bother taking off her house shoes. She placed the lid back on the beautiful box, grabbed her keys, and walked out to her old Honda Civic. Marcus and Keisha lived only 15 minutes away in a modest suburb. When Fanny pulled up to the house, Keisha's minivan was in the driveway, but Marcus's flashy car was nowhere to be seen. Fanny walked up the path, noticing the uncut grass and the peeling paint on the porch railing. It broke her heart a little. Marcus was walking around wearing Gucci, while his home was crying out for maintenance. She rang the doorbell. A moment later, Keisha opened it, looking frazzled, wiping soapy hands on a dish towel. "Mama Fanny, happy birthday?" Keisha's face lit up, though she looked exhausted. "I'm so sorry we didn't come over. I was going to bring the kids by later, but Maya had a lot of homework and—" "Hush, baby, it's all right," Fanny said warmly, stepping inside and enveloping her daughter-in-law in a hug. "I know how it is. I didn't come to bother y'all. I just brought something." Fanny held out the midnight blue box. Keisha's eyes widened. "Oh, Mama Fanny, these are gorgeous. What is this?" "Marcus sent them to me for my birthday," Fanny said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "Ordered them all the way from New Orleans. But you know I can't be eating all this sugar with my blood pressure. I figured my grandbabies would enjoy them a whole lot more than me. And maybe you can have a few with a glass of wine tonight when they go to sleep." Keisha looked at this box, her expression softening into a mix of gratitude and something akin to pity. She knew Fanny was covering for Marcus's absence. "Thank you, Mama. You're too good to us," Keisha said softly. "Are you sure you don't want to keep just one?" "Child, no. If I eat one, I'll eat 6, Fanny laughed, waving her hand. "You give them to Maya and Trey after dinner. Tell them Nana loves them." "I will, thank you. Do you want to come in?" "They're in the living room watching cartoons." "No, honey, you go finish your dishes. I'm going to head back, watch my stories, and get some rest. I'll see y'all on Sunday." Fanny walked back to her car, feeling a little lighter. She had done a good deed. She had shared her son's lavish gift with the people she loved most. As she drove home, she convinced herself that it was a good birthday. Marcus had thought of her, even if it was just an expensive gesture. She had absolutely no idea that handing that box to Keisha was the single most consequential decision of her entire life. The house was dark and quiet. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked rhythmically, a comforting, familiar sound. It was 1:45 a.m. Fanny was fast asleep in her bedroom, the heavy quilt pulled up to her chin. She was dreaming of a summer day long ago, holding a young Marcus by the hand as they walked through the park. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the silence of the house. Shrill, piercing, relentless. Fanny jerked awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. It took her disoriented mind a few seconds to realize it was the landline ringing on her bedside table. At nearly 2 a.m, a ringing phone in a black household never meant good news. It meant sickness, prison, or death. Her hand trembled as she reached for the receiver, knocking her reading glasses off the nightstand in the process. "Hello?" she rasped, her throat dry. "Mama Fanny! Mama!" The scream on the other end of the line chilled Fanny to the very marrow of her bones. It was Keisha. But it wasn't just crying. It was the raw, primal shriek of a mother watching her world end. "Keisha? Baby, calm down. What's wrong? What is it?" Fanny sat bolt upright, throwing the covers off. "It's the kids. They're not breathing right. Maya is shaking. She's throwing up blood. Oh, God, Trey's eyes are rolling back. I can't wake him up." Keisha was hysterical, the sound of her panic echoing through the phone, mixed with the horrifying sound of a child gagging violently in the background. Fanny's nursing instincts, dormant but never gone, instantly snapped into high gear. Adrenaline flooded her system. "Keisha, listen to me. Did you call 911? "The ambulance is on the way. I don't know what happened, Mama. They were fine. They went to sleep, and then they woke up screaming. It hurts. They say their stomachs are burning." "Where is Marcus?" Fanny demanded, pinning the phone between her ear and shoulder as she scrambled out of bed, grabbing the first pair of pants and shoes she could find in the dark. "He's not here. He said he had a late meeting. He's not answering his phone. Mama, please, I'm so scared. Trey is turning blue." "I'm on my way to County General. Tell the paramedics to take them there. Breathe, Keisha. Turn Trey on his side so he doesn't choke." "I'm coming right now." Fanny slammed the phone down. She didn't bother with a coat. She grabbed her keys and ran out into the cold night air. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and silent prayers. Fanny pushed her old Honda to its limits, running 2 red lights. Her mind raced through a Rolodex of medical possibilities. Food poisoning? A severe allergic reaction? Appendicitis? But both of them at the exact same time with those extreme symptoms? It didn't make medical sense. When she pulled into the emergency room parking lot, the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance were already illuminating the entrance. Fanny parked haphazardly and sprinted toward the sliding glass doors. The ER was a familiar place to her. She had worked these halls, saved lives in these rooms. But walking in as a terrified grandmother was a completely different kind of hell. She burst through the doors. The triage area was chaotic. "Keisha!" Fanny yelled. She saw her daughter-in-law collapsed against a wall near Trauma Room 2, her face buried in her hands, her clothes stained with what looked like vomit. Fanny ran to her, pulling the younger woman into a fierce embrace. Keisha was sobbing so hard she was hyperventilating. "They took them in," Keisha gasped, clutching Fanny's shirt. "There's so many doctors. Mama, what if I lose them? What if they die?" "We rebuke that in the name of Jesus," Fanny said fiercely, her voice shaking but her grip strong. "They are not going anywhere. Do you hear me? My grandbabies are strong." Fanny looked up and saw Dr. Eris Thorne pushing through the swinging doors of the trauma unit. He was an old colleague of Fanny's, a brilliant toxicologist. His face was grim, his scrubs messy. "Eris," Fanny stepped forward, her professional facade crumbling. "Eris, those are my grandchildren. What is happening?" "Doctor." Thorne looked at Fanny, his eyes softening with deep pity, but his voice was urgent. "Fanny, they're stabilizing, but it's bad. Their blood pressure crashed, and they're having severe gastrointestinal hemorrhaging." "What caused it?" Fanny asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Dr. Thorne stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Fanny and Keisha could hear. "Fanny, we're running a tox screen right now, but based on the presentation, the garlic odor on their breath, the rapid onset of hemorrhagic gastroenteritis, I have to notify the police." Fanny felt the blood drain from her face. The hallway seemed to tilt. "Police? Why?" "Because," Dr. Thorne said, his voice heavy with dread, "this doesn't look like food poisoning. It looks like heavy metal ingestion. Specifically, arsenic. Arsenic." The word hung in the cold hospital air like a guillotine. "Poison?" Keisha whispered, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror. No, they didn't eat anything strange. We had dinner, and then for dessert they just had—" Keisha stopped. The color vanished from her face. She slowly turned her head to look at Fanny. Fanny felt her heart stop. The memory hit her with the force of a freight train. The midnight blue box, the gold ribbon, the typed note. They just had the chocolates. Before Fanny could process the terrifying implication of that thought, the ER doors slid open violently. Marcus burst into the waiting room. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild, his chest heaving as if he had run miles. He scanned the room frantically until his eyes locked onto Fanny and Keisha. He ran toward them, but as he got closer, his expression didn't morph into the terrified concern of a father. Instead, when his eyes met Fanny's, when he saw her standing there, alive, breathing, perfectly healthy, a look of absolute unadulterated shock crossed his face. He didn't look at the trauma room doors. He didn't ask Keisha how the kids were. He grabbed Fanny by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh with bruising force, his voice cracking with a terrifying, hysterical panic. "Why are you here?" Marcus screamed, his eyes darting wildly. "Why didn't you eat them? I sent them to you. Why didn't you eat the chocolates, Ma?" In that split second, the world stopped spinning. The hospital noises faded into a dull ring in Fanny's ears. She looked into the eyes of the boy she had birthed, the boy she had starved for, the boy she loved more than life itself. There was no love looking back at her. There was only the desperate, cornered panic of a murderer whose perfect plan had just gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. Fanny Washington didn't faint. She didn't cry. The maternal veil that had covered her eyes for 40 years ripped away in a single brutal motion. As she stared at her son, the warm, loving mother inside her died, and something entirely different took her place. "Why didn't you eat them? I sent them to you." The words echoed in the sterile ER waiting room, hanging in the air like toxic smoke. For a fraction of a second, the mask had completely slipped from Marcus's face, revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. Then realization struck him. He saw the horror in Keisha's tear-streaked face. He saw the cold, unblinking stare of the mother he had just inadvertently confessed to attempting to murder. Marcus stumbled back, his hands waving frantically as he tried to reel the words back in. I mean, I bought them for you, Ma. It was a special gift. Why would you give my gift away? If the bakery messed up the batch, it should have been you getting a stomachache, not my kids. That's all I meant." He was sweating profusely, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a borrowed costume. Keisha, exhausted and traumatized, seemed to accept the flimsy backpedaling. She let out a fresh sob and buried her face in her hands. But Fanny didn't buy a single syllable. She didn't scream. She didn't slap him. She didn't call him a monster. Instead, an unnatural, glacial calm descended upon her. The warm, nurturing heart of a mother who had sacrificed everything for her only child calcified in an instant, turning into something hard and impenetrable. "The police are coming, Marcus," Fanny said, her voice devoid of any recognizable emotion. It was flat, hollow. "They need the box. They need to test the chocolates." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Right, good. We're going to sue that bakery into the ground. I swear to God, Keisha, I'm going to make them pay." When the police arrived, Marcus played the role of the outraged, protective father to perfection. He handed over the receipt from the New Orleans boutique, demanding justice for a contaminated food product. The officers took his statement, bagged the midnight blue box from Keisha's house, and promised a thorough investigation. But Fanny knew the police moved too slow. She needed answers now. Later that morning, while Keisha slept in a chair beside the children's hospital beds and Marcus nervously paced the corridors, Fanny slipped out. She sat in her old Honda Civic in the parking garage and made a phone call. "Terrence," Fanny said when the line picked up. Terrence was her second cousin's son, a former Atlanta PD detective who now ran a discreet private investigation firm in the city. "I need your help. Off the books. And I need it fast." 2 days later, the children were finally discharged, weak but out of danger. The police investigation was stalling. The boutique in New Orleans claimed their kitchen was spotless and demanded a private lab test. But Fanny had her own lab results. She met Dr. Thorne in the hospital cafeteria during his break. He slid a folded piece of paper across the laminate table, his face grave. "The police lab is looking for standard foodborne pathogens and basic poisons, Fanny," Dr. Thorne whispered, looking around to ensure no one was listening. "But I ran a specific, detailed toxicology screen based on the symptoms. It wasn't just arsenic." Fanny looked at the complex chemical breakdown on the paper. "Speak plain to me, heiress." "It was a highly sophisticated cocktail," Dr. Thorne explained, his voice tight. "A heavy dose of arsenic, yes, but synthesized with a specific vasodilator, a chemical designed to drop blood pressure catastrophically." He paused, looking at Fanny with a mixture of professional awe and personal horror. "Fanny, you take a very specific high-dose beta blocker for your hypertension. If you had eaten even 2 of those truffles, the chemical interaction would have triggered an immediate, massive myocardial infarction, a heart attack. To a standard coroner, it would look completely natural for a woman your age. It was tailored for you." Fanny stared at the paper. The chill in her veins turned into ice. This wasn't a reckless mistake. This was a premeditated, medically calculated assassination. "Thank you, heiress," Fanny said softly, folding the paper and slipping it into her purse. "Keep this between us for now." The following Thursday, Fanny sat in a quiet booth at a diner on the outskirts of the city. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the storm raging inside her. Terrence slid into the booth across from her, shaking off his wet umbrella. He didn't smile. He placed a thick manila folder on the table, resting his large hands on top of it. "Aunt Fanny," Terrence started, using the respectful family title, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I don't know how to tell you this. I dug into Marcus. The boy has been living a complete lie." Fanny took a sip of her black coffee. She didn't flinch. "Show me." Terrence opened the folder. It was a graveyard of financial ruin. "He's not a successful investor. The crypto market tanked on him months ago. He was running a mini Ponzi scheme, trying to use new clients' money to cover his old losses, and it all collapsed," Terrence explained, pointing to bank statements filled with red ink. "How much does he owe?" "To the banks? About 50 grand, Terrence said. "But that's not the problem. He got desperate. He went to some predatory lenders, street guys operating out of a cash advance front in downtown Atlanta. He owes them $300,000, and the interest compounds weekly. These aren't people who take you to small claims court, Aunt Fanny. These are people who break legs and burn houses down." Fanny closed her eyes for a brief moment. Generational wealth, he had boasted. He was building his generational wealth on quicksand and blood. "There's more," Terrence said softly, pushing another document forward. It was a deed of trust. He took out a second mortgage on his house 6 months ago to try and pay off the initial debt, but he hasn't made a single payment. The bank is foreclosing next week. Fanny looked at the signatures. She recognized Marcus's arrogant scrawl. Next to it was Keisha's signature. Fanny squinted, tracing the ink with her finger. Keisha didn't sign this, Fanny said definitively. Her K loops differently. He forged his own wife's signature to risk the roof over his children's heads. He's intercepting the mail, keeping Keisha in the dark, Terrence confirmed. Aunt Fanny, he is a drowning man, and he's willing to pull everyone down with him to catch a breath. Fanny closed the folder, her jaw set like stone. He needed money. He needed it desperately. But why kill her? She didn't have $300,000 sitting in a checking account. She lived on a pension and Social Security. Unless... Fanny thanked Terrence, paid the bill, and walked out into the rain. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, forming a picture so ugly she could barely stand to look at it. Fanny waited until she knew Marcus was out of the house. He had claimed he was going to the office to handle the lawsuit against the bakery, but Terrence had informed her that Marcus was actually frantically driving around the city, trying to dodge the loan sharks tailing his car. Fanny knocked on Keisha's door. When it opened, Fanny's heart broke anew. Keisha looked like a ghost. She had lost weight in just a week, her eyes sunken, her spirit thoroughly broken. The kids were at school for the first day since the incident. "Mama Fanny," Keisha whispered, stepping aside to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. The house was too quiet. Fanny didn't bother with small talk. She reached into her bag and pulled out the manila folder Terrence had given her. "Keisha, baby, I need you to be strong," Fanny said, taking her daughter-in-law's trembling hands. "Marcus has been lying to both of us." Fanny walked Keisha through the documents. She showed her the forged signature, the foreclosure notices, the massive debt to dangerous men. Keisha didn't scream. Instead, she let out a long, agonizing wail, a sound of profound grief as the illusion of her marriage shattered into dust. "My babies," Keisha sobbed, rocking back and forth. "We're going to lose our home. He put my babies in danger. For money." "He did worse than that," Fanny said, her voice a low, steady rumble of thunder. "Keisha, the chocolates weren't a bakery mistake. Marcus poisoned them. He meant to kill me." Keisha stopped rocking. She stared at Fanny, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked like she wanted to deny it, to call Fanny crazy. But the truth was a heavy, undeniable weight in the room. Keisha's eyes darted around the kitchen, her mind racing backward, connecting dots she hadn't dared to connect before. Suddenly, Keisha gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. She stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the linoleum. "The light fixture," Keisha breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "What?" Fanny asked. 2 days before your birthday, Marcus said he was going over to your house to fix the flickering light above your kitchen island," Keisha said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "He was acting so weird, so nervous. A few days later, when I was doing the laundry, I found a receipt in his suit pocket. It was from an electronics store. For a micro-surveillance camera." Fanny felt the room spin. "I thought he was spying on me," Keisha cried, running to the living room and grabbing Marcus's laptop from the desk. "I thought he was cheating and tracking me. I guessed his password. It's his own birthday, the narcissist. I logged in, looking for emails. But I found a hidden folder with an IP feed." Keisha brought the laptop to the kitchen table. Her fingers flew across the keys, her hands shaking so badly she missed the keys twice. Finally, she opened a video file. Fanny stared at the screen. It was a crystal-clear, wide-angle shot of her own kitchen. The angle was looking down from the ceiling light fixture directly onto the kitchen island, the exact spot where she always opened her mail and packages. Fanny watched the recording. It was from her birthday. She watched herself on screen walking into the kitchen holding the midnight blue box. She watched herself untie the ribbon. "He was watching," Fanny whispered, the profound sickness of the act turning her stomach. "He wanted to see it happen," Keisha sobbed, slamming the laptop shut as if the screen itself were venomous. "He wanted to watch you eat them, watch you collapse so he could rush over, clear away the box, and call 911 like a grieving son. He wanted to watch you die, Mama. This was the final nail. It wasn't just a moment of panicked desperation. It was a cold, calculated, deeply sadistic plan." Fanny stood up. She pulled Keisha into her arms, letting the younger woman cry against her shoulder. Listen to me, Keisha, Fanny commanded, her voice vibrating with a newfound, terrifying strength. You pack a bag. You take the kids to your sister's house in Savannah tonight. Tell Marcus your mother is sick. You get my grandbabies out of this city. What are you going to do? Keisha asked, looking up at Fanny with fearful reverence. I'm going to clean house, Fanny said. When Fanny returned to her quiet, empty house, she walked straight to her bedroom. She stood in front of the full-length mirror. For 40 years, she had looked in this mirror and seen a mother, a woman who put herself second, third, last. A woman who wore modest, muted colors so her son could shine in tailored suits. A woman who relaxed and straightened her hair every month because Marcus once told her that natural hair didn't look professional when she attended his school functions. She stared at the woman in the mirror, and for the first time in her life, she let the grief break her. She fell to her knees on the plush carpet, and she wept. She mourned the baby boy she had rocked to sleep. She mourned the teenage boy who had proudly handed her his high school diploma. She mourned the man she thought she had raised. She cried until her chest ached and her throat was raw. She cried until there were absolutely no tears left. Then she stood up. The mourning period was over. The mother who gave everything was dead, murdered by her own flesh and blood. Fanny walked into the bathroom. She turned on the hot water in the sink. She took her expensive hair straighteners, the hot combs, the chemical relaxers, and threw them all into the trash can. She washed her hair, aggressively scrubbing away the products that bound her. When she stepped out, she looked in the mirror again. Her natural hair, a beautiful, striking crown of silver and charcoal coils, stood proud and defiant around her face. She walked to her closet. She bypassed the beige cardigans and the dull floral dresses. She reached into the back and pulled out a vibrant emerald green pantsuit she had bought years ago for a church banquet but never wore because Marcus had said it was too flashy for an old lady. She put it on. She applied a bold ruby red lipstick. She put on her favorite gold hoop earrings. Fanny Washington was not a victim. She was a survivor, a matriarch, a warrior. And she was going to war. She grabbed her purse and drove straight to the First National Bank downtown. She sat in the plush office of Mr. Henderson, the bank manager who had known her for 20 years. Ms. Fanny, it's always a pleasure, Mr. Henderson smiled. How can I help you today? Looking to move some funds into a CD. No, Arthur, Fanny said smoothly, her posture perfect, her voice commanding. I need to close my retirement savings account and my mutual funds. I need it all liquidated. Mr. Henderson blinked, stunned. Ms. Fanny, that's nearly $400,000. Are you sure? The tax penalties? I don't care about the penalties, Fanny interrupted, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made the banker sit up straighter. I need a cashier's check for the full amount. Today. That money had been her safety net. It was the inheritance she had painstakingly built, dollar by dollar, night shift by night shift, to leave to Marcus when she passed away naturally. It was the irony of ironies. If Marcus had just waited, if he had just been a decent man, it would have all been his. But he hadn't waited. He had tried to steal her life for it. Now Fanny was going to use the very money he tried to kill her for to completely and utterly dismantle his existence. She was going to buy his debt. She was going to own him. Fanny walked out of the bank with a cashier's check tucked securely in her designer leather bag. The storm clouds outside were breaking, a ray of late afternoon sun catching the silver in her crown of hair. The trap was set. Now she just had to lure the rat. Marcus looked like a ghost of the man who had strutted into Fanny's kitchen just a week and a half prior. When he knocked on Fanny's door on a gloomy Wednesday evening, his bespoke suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and a frantic, greasy sweat clung to his forehead. He had bags under his eyes thick enough to carry groceries. The loan sharks were closing in, the bank was foreclosing on his house, and Keisha had taken the kids to Savannah, refusing to answer his calls. His world was rapidly collapsing. Fanny opened the door. She was wearing her emerald green pantsuit, her silver-streaked natural hair standing proud. Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown off by his mother's appearance. Ma, what's with the hair and the suit? I decided it was time for a change, Marcus. Come in, Fanny said smoothly, stepping aside. Marcus practically fell into the living room, collapsing onto the sofa. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged sigh that sounded like a dying engine. Ma, I'm in trouble, he whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogant businessman was gone, replaced by the desperate, pleading boy he used to be when he broke a neighbor's window. Deep trouble. Fanny sat in her armchair, crossing her legs. She didn't offer him a glass of water. She didn't go to comfort him. She just watched him. What kind of trouble? Financial, Marcus lied smoothly, though his hands shook. A deal went sideways. The market flipped on me. I owe some bad people some money, Ma. Dangerous people. They're threatening me. And Keisha, she left. She took the kids because I haven't been able to pay the mortgage. I'm going to lose everything. He looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. He was a spectacular actor. If she hadn't seen the video of him spying on her, waiting for her to die, she would have remortgaged her soul to save him. How much, Marcus? Fanny asked, her voice a calm, even baseline. 300,000, he choked out. He fell to his knees in front of her armchair, grabbing her hands. His palms were cold and clammy. Ma, I know it's a lot. I know, but you own this house outright. It's worth at least 400. If you sign the deed over to me, or let me take a loan against it, I can pay them off. I swear to God I'll pay you back every cent. I'll work 3 jobs. Just please, don't let them kill me. Fanny looked down at the man kneeling before her. He was begging for his life, trying to steal the very roof over her head, just days after he had tried to stop her heart. The sheer, unadulterated sociopathy of it was breathtaking. Fanny gently pulled her hands out of his grasp. She offered him a sad, maternal smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus, you are my only son, she said softly. The words tasted like ash. I would never let anyone hurt you. I will help you. Marcus let out a sob of profound relief, dropping his head to her knees. Thank you, Ma. Oh, God. Thank you. I need the papers signed tomorrow. They're breathing down my neck. Not tomorrow, Fanny interrupted, her tone suddenly firm. If we are doing this, we are doing it right. Legally. I'm not signing my house away on a coffee table. You meet me at Mr. Sterling's law office on Friday at 3 p.m. He'll draw up the paperwork to transfer the equity. And Marcus? He looked up, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Yeah, Ma? Dress nice. A man should always look his best when signing his life away. The conference room at Sterling & Associates was an intimidating space of dark mahogany, leather chairs, and a massive glass table that reflected the Atlanta skyline. At 2:55 p.m., Marcus practically sprinted into the room. He had taken Fanny's advice. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his hair freshly faded, though he couldn't quite hide the tremor in his hands. Fanny was already sitting at the head of the table. To her right sat Mr. Sterling, a silver-haired, no-nonsense attorney who had known Fanny's family for decades. Ma, Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, breathless, pulling out a chair. Do you have the papers? I have a guy waiting downstairs to run the transfer to the bank. Sit down, Marcus, Fanny said. Before Marcus could reach for a pen, the heavy oak door of the conference room opened again. Terrence walked in. Behind him was Keisha, looking resolute, her eyes devoid of the tears that had drowned her earlier in the week. And behind Keisha walked a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a badge on his belt. Detective Miller, Atlanta PD. Marcus froze. His hand hovered over the table. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. What is this? Ma, who are these people? Keisha, what are you doing here? We aren't here to sign away my house, Marcus, Fanny said. Her voice rang out in the quiet room with the authority of a judge handing down a sentence. We are here to end your lies. Fanny nodded to Mr. Sterling. The lawyer pushed a thick file folder across the glass table. It stopped right in front of Marcus. Open it, Fanny commanded. Trembling, Marcus flipped the cover open. The first page was a blown-up, high-definition photograph. It was a still frame from the hidden camera he had installed in Fanny's kitchen, showing him adjusting the lens. Keisha found your little surveillance feed, Fanny said, watching his eyes widen in horror. Did you enjoy the show, Marcus? Were you disappointed when I walked out the door with that box instead of eating it? This is photoshopped. This is crazy, Marcus stammered, his eyes darting toward the detective. I was just checking the electrical wiring. Turn the page, Terrence said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Marcus turned it. It was the official toxicology report from Dr. Thorne, complete with the hospital seal, detailing the specific interaction between the arsenic the vasodilator, and Fanny's exact dosage of blood pressure medication. The police lab might take a month, but my doctors are much faster, Fanny said smoothly. That wasn't a bakery error. That was a localized, chemically engineered assassination attempt. You tried to give me a heart attack, Marcus. This is insane, Marcus yelled, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He pointed at Keisha. You put her up to this. You're trying to take the kids and frame me. Sit down, Detective Miller barked, stepping forward, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. Marcus swallowed hard and sank back into his chair. The question was why, Fanny continued, unaffected by his outburst. Why would my son, the boy I scrubbed floors for, want me dead? Terrence found your debts, $300,000 to street hustlers, but that still didn't make sense. Killing me wouldn't give you $300,000. I didn't have that kind of liquid cash, and probate takes months. You needed fast money. Fanny reached into her own emerald green designer bag. She pulled out a pristine, crisp document and laid it flat on the table. A secret life insurance policy, Fanny announced, tapping the paper. Taken out 18 months ago. You are the sole beneficiary. Benefit amount, $1 million. But this is the part that broke my heart, Marcus. You paid extra for a specific rider, a double indemnity clause. If the insured, me, dies of a sudden catastrophic medical event in their own home, the payout doubles. $2 million, tax-free, wired in 72 hours upon the coroner's report. The room was dead silent. Keisha stared at her husband as if she were looking at a demon. Marcus was trapped. The walls were closing in, the evidence insurmountable. He looked at the detective, then at the door, then finally at Fanny. The facade cracked entirely. He burst into tears, ugly, loud, pathetic sobs. "Ma, they were going to kill me," Marcus wailed, burying his face in his hands. "You don't understand. The guys I owe, they said they would come for Keisha. They said they would take Maya and Trey. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear to God. But you're old. You've lived your life. I had to protect my family. I was backed into a corner." "You didn't protect your family," Keisha spat, her voice shaking with pure disgust. "You poisoned your own children." "I needed the money, Ma," Marcus screamed, completely unhinged now, crawling across the glass table toward Fanny, spittle flying from his lips. "If I don't pay them by midnight tonight, I'm a dead man. You have to give them the house. You have to save me." Fanny didn't flinch. She looked at the pathetic, sniveling creature thrashing on the table. She felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no maternal ache. Just the cold, sterile closure of a wound finally being cauterized. "You don't owe those men anymore, Marcus," Fanny said quietly. Marcus froze, his red, tear-stained eyes looking up at her in confusion. "What?" Fanny nodded to Mr. Sterling again. The lawyer pulled out a final set of stapled documents, stamped with red legal seals, and slid them over the life insurance policy. "I went to the bank on Tuesday," Fanny said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I liquidated every cent of my retirement, my savings, and my mutual funds, nearly $400,000. Marcus's eyes lit up with a sudden desperate hope. You paid them? Ma, you paid off the loan sharks?" "No," Fanny said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto his. "I didn't pay them off. I bought your paper." Marcus stopped breathing. "Terrence arranged a meeting with your creditors," Fanny explained, gesturing to her cousin. "I offered them the principal in cold, hard cash. Criminals love cash. In exchange, they legally assigned your debt to me. All of it. The principal, the predatory interest, the forged second mortgage on Keisha's house. Everything." Marcus stared at the documents. It was an assignment of debt agreement. The new creditor listed at the bottom was Fanny Washington. "I own your debt, Marcus," Fanny declared, her voice vibrating with absolute power. "Those men aren't looking for you anymore. I am. And as your sole creditor, I am immediately calling in the loan. Since you cannot pay me $300,000 today, I am foreclosing on your assets." You can't do that," Marcus whispered, the sheer magnitude of his defeat crushing the air from his lungs. "You're my mother." "I was your mother," Fanny corrected him. "Today, I am just the bank, and the bank always collects." Fanny turned to Keisha. "Keisha, Mr. Sterling has drawn up the papers. The second mortgage is voided due to the forged signature. I am transferring the deed of that house entirely into your name. Your home is safe. Your children are safe." Keisha covered her mouth, letting out a sob of overwhelming relief, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you." "As for you," Fanny said, turning back to Marcus, whose soul seemed to have entirely left his body. She looked at Detective Miller. "Detective, I believe you have enough to make an arrest?" "Attempted murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, and felony forgery," Detective Miller said, pulling the handcuffs from his belt. "Stand up, Marcus. Put your hands behind your back." Marcus didn't fight. He didn't scream. He simply stood up, a hollow, broken shell of a man, and let the cold steel click around his wrists. He looked at Fanny one last time, his eyes searching for a shred of the unconditional love he had exploited for 4 decades. He found none. "I spent 40 years building you up, Marcus," Fanny said quietly as the detective led him toward the door. "It only took you 30 minutes to tear yourself down. Goodbye." The air in Savannah was thick with the scent of magnolias and sea salt. 6 months had passed since the doors of the conference room closed on Marcus's old life. The trial had been swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the video, the medical reports, and the testimony of his own wife and mother, Marcus's public defender had brokered a plea deal. He was serving 25 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of parole for 15. Fanny had not visited him. She never would. It was a Sunday morning. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm golden glow over the porch of Keisha's newly painted house. Fanny sat in a white wicker rocking chair, wearing a bright yellow sundress. Her natural hair caught the morning breeze. Beside her, Keisha was sipping a cup of black coffee, looking rested, vibrant, and free. The heavy bags under her eyes were completely gone. In the front yard, Maya and Trey were running through the sprinklers, their joyous laughter echoing down the quiet suburban street. "They asked about him yesterday," Keisha said softly, watching her children play. Fanny kept her eyes on the kids. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That their father made some very bad choices and broke the law, and now he has to stay in a place where he can't hurt anyone anymore," Keisha replied. She took a deep breath. "They cried a little, but then Trey asked if Nana was making peach cobbler for dinner, and he forgot all about it." Fanny smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached the corners of her eyes. "I am making cobbler," Fanny said, "and fried chicken, but I'm not standing over that stove alone today. You're helping me chop the greens, Keisha." "Yes, ma'am," Keisha laughed, leaning over to rest her head on Fanny's shoulder. Fanny took a sip of her iced sweet tea, the condensation cool against her fingers. She looked out at the yard, at the blue sky, at the beautiful family she had managed to save from the wreckage. For 40 years, she had carried the crushing weight of a mother's blind devotion. She had starved her own soul to feed a monster. But that burden was gone now, washed away by the harsh, cleansing light of truth. She had lost a son, yes, but in the process, she had found her daughter, she had saved her grandchildren, and most importantly, she had found herself. Fanny leaned back in the rocking chair, closed her eyes, and let the Savannah sun warm her face. The ties of family could be fragile, easily broken by greed and betrayal. But the ties forged in the fire of survival, those were unbreakable. And for the first time in a very long time, Fanny Washington's heart beat with absolute, unbroken peace. Healing, Fanny learned, was not a destination. It was a daily practice. It wasn't about forgetting the deep, jagged wounds of the past, but about planting something beautiful in the scarred earth left behind. 5 years after the heavy oak doors of the courtroom had closed on Marcus, Fanny stood in the brightly lit foyer of a renovated brick building in downtown Atlanta. Above the entrance, a sleek silver sign read, "The Washington Sisterhood Center for Women." Fanny was 70 now, but she possessed a vibrant, luminous energy that she had never known in her youth. She wore a tailored plum-colored suit, her silver hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. The timid, overly sacrificing mother who used to hide in beige cardigans was a distant memory. In her place stood a matriarch, a community leader, and a fierce protector. "Mama Fanny, we need you in room 3. Ms. Loretta is having a hard time with the intake forms," a voice called out. Fanny turned to see Keisha walking down the hall, holding a clipboard. Keisha had transformed, too. With Fanny's financial backing and emotional support, Keisha had gone back to school and earned her master's degree in social work. She was now the lead counselor at the center. "I'm coming, baby," Fanny smiled, adjusting her glasses. Fanny had taken the money she salvaged from Marcus's ruined empire. along with smart investments she had made under the guidance of a trusted financial advisor, and poured it into the community. The Washington Sisterhood Center was a sanctuary for elderly African American women who were facing financial, emotional, or physical abuse, often at the hands of their own family members. It was a silent epidemic in their community. Mothers and grandmothers who had given their last dimes to ungrateful children, women who were manipulated out of their deeds, their pensions, and their peace of mind. Fanny gave them pro bono legal counsel, financial literacy classes, and, most importantly, a safe space to share their shame. Fanny walked into room 3. Ms. Loretta, a frail woman in her late 70s, was staring at a stack of legal papers, her hands trembling. Her grandson had secretly taken out credit cards in her name, destroying her credit and leaving her facing eviction. "I just don't understand," Ms. Loretta wept, wiping her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "I raised that boy in the church. I gave him my last dollar. How could he do this to his own flesh and blood?" Fanny sat down beside her, gently taking the older woman's trembling hands in her own firm, warm grasp. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She offered the profound, heavy truth of a woman who had walked through the exact same fire. "Loretta, listen to me," Fanny said, her voice a soothing but unyielding anchor in the room. "You gave him love. You gave him grace. What he chose to do with it is a reflection of his brokenness, not your failure as a mother. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional access to your life, your money, or your peace." Ms. Loretta looked up, her tear-filled eyes searching Fanny's face. "But he's my family." "Sometimes," Fanny said softly, "the people who share our blood are the ones most willing to spill it. You are safe here. We are going to fix this credit mess. We are going to secure your housing, and we are going to teach you how to say no without feeling guilty. You hear me?" Ms. Loretta nodded slowly, a tiny spark of hope igniting in her tired eyes. Fanny left the room an hour later, her heart full. Every woman she helped step out of the shadows of familial abuse was a victory over the darkness Marcus had tried to pull her into. He had wanted to kill her to steal her inheritance. Instead, he had catalyzed a movement. Her true inheritance wasn't the money in the bank. It was the wisdom and strength she was passing down to hundreds of women. 8 years into Marcus's sentence, the past came knocking. Fanny was sitting in her home office, reviewing grant proposals for the center, when Terrence called. His voice was unusually tight. "Aunt Fanny," he started, "I just got a notification from the State Penitentiary Board. Marcus has filed for an early parole hearing. Overcrowding in the prisons, good behavior. They're granting him a chance to state his case next month." Fanny's pen hovered over the paper. Her heart gave a singular, heavy thud, but the panic that would have paralyzed her a decade ago was entirely absent. She took a slow breath, leaning back in her leather chair. "Send me the dates, Terrence," she said calmly. "And call Keisha. We have a drive to make." A month later, Fanny and Keisha walked through the heavy, echoing corridors of the state penitentiary. The air was sterile, smelling of bleach and institutional despair. They were escorted into a stark, cinder-block hearing room dominated by a long metal table. The parole board, consisting of 3 stern-faced officials, sat at the head. A heavy metal door buzzed open, and Marcus was led in by 2 guards. Fanny hadn't seen her son in 8 years. The shock of his appearance almost made her gasp. He was only in his late 40s, but he looked 60. His hair was completely white, receding deeply at the temples. His broad shoulders were hunched, and his prison jumpsuit hung off a frame that had lost all its vitality. The arrogant swagger of the man in the bespoke suit was entirely gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated inmate. He sat down across from them. When he lifted his eyes and looked at Fanny, they immediately filled with tears. "Ma," he whispered, his voice raspy and weak. "Keisha, you came." "We are here at the request of the board, inmate 49021, Keisha said, her voice like cracking ice. She didn't even use his name. The hearing began. Marcus's state-appointed advocate spoke of his spotless disciplinary record, his participation in anger management and financial ethics classes, and his deep, profound remorse. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He looked directly at Fanny, clasping his hands together on the metal table. "Ma, I am so sorry," he wept, the tears flowing freely down his aged, lined face. "Every day in this cell, I think about what I did. I was lost. I was sick with greed. I found God in here, Ma. I lead the Bible study on Cell Block D. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you to forgive me. I just want a chance to be a grandfather one day, to prove I can be a good man." It was a masterful performance. It hit all the right notes: repentance, religion, family. One of the parole board members, a younger woman, actually looked moved. Fanny let the silence stretch in the room. She looked at her son, truly looked at him. She saw the fear, she saw the regret, but beneath the tears, she still saw the manipulator who thought he could use her maternal heart as a get-out-of-jail-free card. The head of the board turned to Fanny.
Busy.
"Washington, as the primary victim, your statement carries significant weight. Do you have anything to say regarding the inmate's release?" Fanny stood up. She smoothed the front of her tailored suit. She didn't look at the board. She looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "My son just spoke about finding God," Fanny began, her voice steady, echoing with quiet, terrifying authority. "I am glad for him. I truly am, because God's capacity for forgiveness is infinite. Mine is not." Marcus's face crumpled. "8 years ago, this man did not make a mistake," Fanny continued, turning her gaze to the board members. "A mistake is bouncing a check. A mistake is running a red light. This man spent weeks carefully planning my murder. He bought a camera to watch me die. He calculated the exact dosage of a chemical that would stop my heart while mimicking a natural death, solely so he could collect a $2 million insurance payout. And when his plan failed, he was perfectly willing to let his own children die from the poison he bought." The younger board member who had looked sympathetic suddenly looked violently ill. "He speaks of remorse," Fanny said, looking back at Marcus. "I believe he is sorry. He is sorry that he got caught. He is sorry that he lost his luxury cars and his house. He is sorry that he is wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit. But true remorse requires accountability, and accountability requires facing the full consequences of your actions." Fanny leaned slightly forward, resting her hands on the cold metal table. "I forgive you, Marcus. I forgave you years ago so that the hatred wouldn't rot my own soul. But forgiveness is for my peace. It does not erase your debt to society. You tried to end my life. I am asking this board to ensure you serve every single day of the 25 years you were given for that choice." She sat down. Keisha reached under the table and squeezed Fanny's hand tightly. The board deliberated for less than 10 minutes. "Parole denied." The chairman banged his gavel. "The inmate will be eligible for review in another 7 years." Marcus let out a guttural cry, dropping his head to the table as the guard stepped forward to pull him up by his arms. "Ma, please! You can't leave me in here. I'm your son." "Goodbye, Marcus," Fanny said softly, not breaking her gaze as he was dragged backward through the heavy metal door. The door slammed shut with a definitive echoing clang. When Fanny and Keisha walked out of the prison and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot, Fanny took a deep breath of the fresh, sweet air. The last ghost of her past had been exorcised. She was entirely free. 10 more years passed like a river flowing toward the ocean, swift, powerful, and life-affirming. Fanny Washington was 80 years old. She walked a little slower now, leaning on a beautiful mahogany cane carved with traditional African motifs, a gift from Maya on her high school graduation. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and her spirit was unbreakable. The foundation had expanded beyond Atlanta, opening branches in Charlotte and New Orleans. Keisha was now the executive director, running the daily operations with the same fierce protective energy she used to guard her children. Maya was in her 2nd year of law school, determined to fight for elder rights, and Trey was a strapping young man studying architecture at Morehouse College. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Fanny was sitting on the wraparound porch of the new home she had bought in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the Georgia sky in brilliant strokes of violet and burnt orange. The phone inside the house rang. Keisha, who was inside making dinner, answered it. A few moments later, Keisha stepped out onto the porch. She looked pale, holding the cordless phone against her chest. "Mama Fanny," Keisha said, her voice barely a whisper. "That was the warden at the state penitentiary." Fanny stopped rocking her chair. She looked at Keisha, reading the ending of the story in her daughter-in-law's eyes before the words were even spoken. "Marcus passed away an hour ago," Keisha said, tears quietly filling her eyes. Not tears of heartbreak, but the complicated, heavy tears of a profound, tragic closure. "He collapsed in the recreation yard. Fanny looked out at the sunset. The breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree in her front yard. "What was the cause?" Fanny asked, her voice steady. Keisha let out a breath that sounded like a dry laugh. "The warden said the medical examiner confirmed it immediately. It was a massive myocardial infarction. A heart attack, Mama. A sudden fatal heart attack." The profound, inescapable irony of the universe settled over the porch. The man who had meticulously engineered a fake heart attack to kill his mother had ultimately been struck down by a real one. The circle was complete. "They said he left a letter in his cell, specifically addressed to you," Keisha added. "They're mailing it to the house." 3 days later, a stark white envelope with a Department of Corrections stamp arrived. Fanny took it to her study. She sat at her desk, put on her reading glasses, and opened it with a silver letter opener. The handwriting was shaky, barely recognizable as the bold, arrogant script Marcus used to have. "Dear Ma, the doctors told me my heart is failing. They said I don't have much time. I am writing this because I know I won't survive to see the next parole hearing. I spent the first 10 years in here hating you for leaving me. I spent the next 5 years hating myself for what I did. But lately I've just been reading the newspaper clippings about the Sisterhood Center. The guards bring them to me. I see your face in the papers. You look so beautiful, Ma, stronger than I ever remember. I finally understand the truth. I tried to destroy you because I was weak, and I thought your unconditional love made you weak too. I was a fool. I am dying in this cage, but I know that out there, because of you, hundreds of women are free. My evil action was the catalyst for your greatness. It's the only thing in my miserable life I can look back on and find a twisted kind of peace in. If I hadn't broken your heart, you never would have found your power. I don't ask for your forgiveness anymore. I only ask that when you look at Maya and Trey, you remember the little boy who used to hold your hand in the park before the greed took him. Goodbye, Ma. Marcus." Fanny read the letter twice. She didn't cry. The well of tears for Marcus had dried up almost 2 decades ago. She folded the letter carefully, opened the bottom drawer of her heavy oak desk, and placed it inside a small wooden lockbox. She turned the key, locking away the memory of her son, not out of malice, but out of finality. The book was closed. That Sunday, the house was filled with the chaotic, joyful noise of family. The dining room table groaned under the weight of a feast. Keisha was carving the roast, Trey was debating sports loudly with his new girlfriend, and Maya was helping Fanny carry a massive bubbling peach cobbler out of the kitchen. "Careful, Nana, it's heavy," Maya smiled, her bright eyes reflecting the warmth of the room. "I got it, baby." "My hands are stronger than they look," Fanny replied, setting the dessert down perfectly in the center of the table. Fanny stood at the head of the table and looked at the people gathered around it. There were no empty spaces. There were no ghosts haunting the corners of the room. The air was thick with genuine love, respect, and the unbreakable bond of survivors. "All right, everybody grab a hand," Fanny commanded gently. The chatter ceased. Keisha took Fanny's left hand and Maya took her right. The circle closed around the table. Fanny bowed her head, her silver hair catching the light of the chandelier. "Lord, we come before you today with hearts full of gratitude," Fanny prayed, her voice rich and resonant. "We thank you for the food on this table and the roof over our heads. We thank you for the trials that broke us, because in the breaking, you showed us how to rebuild ourselves with iron and grace. We thank you for the truth that set us free and the love that keeps us together. Bless this family. Bless our peace. Amen." "Amen," the table echoed in unison. Fanny opened her eyes. The pain of her past was real, but it no longer defined her. It was merely the dark soil from which her magnificent, empowered life had bloomed. She pulled out her chair, sitting at the head of the table where she rightfully belonged, ready to enjoy the sweetness of a life she had fought so fiercely to keep. The air conditioning in the Washington Sisterhood Center hummed a steady, comforting tune, a stark contrast to the sweltering Atlanta heat pressing against the heavily tinted windows. It had been 5 years since Marcus passed away behind the cold concrete walls of the state penitentiary, and 15 years since the fateful birthday that changed everything. Fanny Washington was now 85. Her steps were slower, heavily reliant on her carved mahogany cane, and her vibrant silver locks had thinned into a delicate, snowy halo. But when she sat in the leather chair in the corner of the center's main consultation room, her presence was still a gravitational force. She wasn't leading the intake sessions anymore. She was watching. Sitting across the polished wooden desk was a 27-year-old woman in a sharp, tailored ivory suit. Maya. Fanny's granddaughter had graduated top of her class from Howard University School of Law. Top law firms across the East Coast had thrown lucrative offers at her, dangling six-figure starting salaries and corner offices. Maya had politely declined them all. She had packed her bags, moved back to Atlanta, and taken the position of lead legal counsel at the foundation her grandmother built. Fanny watched quietly from the corner as Maya leaned forward, her dark eyes locked onto the frail, trembling woman sitting across from her. The client's name was Ms. Clara. She was 72, wearing a faded Sunday hat and clutching a worn leather handbag to her chest like a shield. Beside her sat a thick file of bank statements and property deeds. Ms. Clara's story was a tragically familiar melody. Her youngest son, whom she had bailed out of debt time and time again, had tricked her into signing a power of attorney document. Now he was actively trying to declare her mentally incompetent so he could sell her historic home in the West End and put her in a state-run nursing facility. I just didn't want him to end up on the street, Ms. Clara wept, her voice trembling. I signed the paper because he said it was just to help me pay my bills online. He's my baby. I didn't think he would throw me away for a house. Fanny felt a familiar ache in her chest, an echo of her own past. But she remained silent. This wasn't her battle to fight anymore. Ms. Clara, look at me, Maya said. Her voice was an incredible fusion of Keisha's deep empathy and Fanny's ironclad authority. Ms. Clara slowly looked up, wiping a tear from her wrinkled cheek. You did what a mother does, Maya said softly but firmly. You loved him. You trusted him. You are not foolish and you are not broken. You are the victim of a predator who used your maternal instinct as a weapon. Maya pulled the power of attorney document from the file. She didn't look at it with pity. She looked at it with the clinical, ruthless precision of a surgeon about to cut out a tumor. But here is the good news, Maya continued, sliding a fresh document across the desk. A power of attorney can be revoked, and a fraudulent competency claim can be fought. We are going to file a revocation order today. Then we are placing an immediate freeze on your assets and a lis pendens on your property title. Your son cannot sell a single brick of that house without coming through me first. And I promise you, Ms. Clara, he does not want to come through me. Ms. Clara let out a shaky breath, the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time in months. Will it cost a lot of money, baby? I only have my Social Security. You don't owe us a dime, Maya smiled warmly. Your legal fees are completely covered by the foundation. All you have to do is be brave and let us do the heavy lifting. From her corner, Fanny smiled. A single proud tear slipped down her cheek. She watched her granddaughter operate. Brilliant, fearless, and deeply rooted in the community. Marcus had once sat at Fanny's dining table, boasting about building generational wealth through crypto schemes and hollow luxury. He had fundamentally misunderstood what the phrase meant. Generational wealth wasn't just about leaving behind money. It was about leaving behind wisdom. It was about breaking the curses of the past so the next generation wouldn't have to carry them. Fanny had paid the ultimate price to learn how to set boundaries, how to demand respect, and how to survive betrayal. Now she didn't just pass down a house or a bank account to Maya. She had passed down the armor. Maya finished the paperwork, walking Ms. Clara to the door with a comforting arm around her shoulder. When the door clicked shut, Maya turned back to the room, letting out a long exhale, slipping off her ivory heels. How did I do, Nana? Maya asked, a playful, tired smile on her face. Fanny gripped her cane and slowly stood up. She walked over to her granddaughter, cupping Maya's beautiful, strong face in her aged hands. You did perfectly, baby, Fanny whispered, kissing her forehead. You gave her back her dignity. There is no higher calling on this earth than that. The transition of power was seamless. As Fanny's physical strength waned, Keisha stepped fully into the role of executive director, and Maya took over the legal battlefield. The Washington Sisterhood Center had become an immovable pillar in the South, recognized nationally for its groundbreaking work in elder abuse legislation. It was late autumn. The Georgia trees were ablaze with fiery reds and burnt oranges. Fanny was sitting on the wraparound porch of her home, wrapped in a thick woven blanket. Beside her sat Keisha. Keisha was in her mid-50s now, the silver beginning to thread beautifully through her own hair. They were sharing a pot of Earl Grey tea, watching the wind sweep the fallen leaves across the manicured lawn. Trey called this morning, Keisha said, pouring a second cup for Fanny. His architectural firm just won the bid to design the new community center in downtown Atlanta. He's going to incorporate a memorial garden for the foundation. He always had a beautiful mind, that boy, Fanny smiled, taking the warm teacup in her hands. He builds things up. He doesn't tear them down. They fell into a comfortable silence. The bond between them had long surpassed that of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They were war veterans who had survived the same trench, sisters forged in the fire of Marcus's betrayal. "Do you ever think about him?" Keisha asked softly, looking out at the horizon. Fanny didn't need to ask who him was. Sometimes, Fanny admitted, her voice calm, devoid of the sharp pain that used to accompany his memory. "Usually when I see a young man walking down the street in a suit that costs more than his rent. But I don't think about the man in the prison. I think about the little boy." Keisha nodded slowly. "It took me a long time to stop feeling guilty. For a long time, I wondered if I could have done something different. If I could have noticed the gambling or the debts before he got desperate enough to try and hurt you." "Keisha," Fanny said firmly, reaching out to cover Keisha's hand with her own. "You cannot outlove a person's demons, and you cannot fix a man who enjoys breaking things. Marcus made his choices. He built his own cage long before they locked him in one." Fanny took a sip of her tea, letting the warm liquid soothe her throat. "I used to think my greatest failure in life was raising a son who wanted to kill me," Fanny confessed, the autumn wind catching the soft wisps of her hair. "But I realize now that my greatest victory was surviving him. Because if I hadn't survived, if I had eaten those chocolates, Maya wouldn't be saving women today. Trey wouldn't be building community centers. And you, my beautiful Keisha, might have been crushed under his debt forever." Fanny looked at Keisha, her dark eyes clear and piercing. "God takes the broken pieces of our lives and builds monuments out of them. We just have to be willing to hand over the pieces." Keisha smiled, tears shining in her eyes. She leaned over and rested her head on Fanny's shoulder, just as she had done on that porch in Savannah so many years ago. "I love you, Mama Fanny." "I love you too, baby. Now drink your tea before the wind takes the heat out of it." 88 years is a long time to carry the weight of the world, and Fanny Washington was finally tired. It wasn't a sudden, tragic illness. It was simply the natural, quiet winding down of a magnificent clock. The doctor said her heart was just exhausted. She chose to forgo the sterile, beeping confines of a hospital room. She wanted to transition at home, in her own bed, surrounded by the scent of lavender and the people she loved. In her final week, the house was never empty. The women of the Sisterhood Center came in droves. They brought casseroles, pound cakes, and sweet potato pies. They sat by her bedside, holding her hands, singing old gospel hymns softly into the evening. They thanked her. They cried. They celebrated her while she was still there to hear it. "You saved my life, Miss Fanny," a woman named Beatrice whispered, kissing Fanny's frail hand. "You saved your own life, Beatrice," Fanny murmured back, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes half closed. "I just handed you the flashlight." On her final evening, the house grew quiet. The community had said their goodbyes, leaving the family to their sacred intimacy. Fanny lay in her large four-poster bed. The bedside lamp cast a warm golden glow across the room. Keisha sat on one side of the bed, softly rubbing Fanny's arm. Trey sat at the foot of the bed, holding his grandmother's feet. Maya sat close to her pillow, holding Fanny's hand. Fanny's breathing was shallow, but she opened her eyes. They were cloudy, but the fierce, loving light inside them remained undimmed. She looked at Trey. "Keep building, my sweet boy. Build things that last." Trey nodded, choking back a sob. "I will, Nana. I promise." She shifted her gaze to Keisha. "You are the strongest woman I know. You keep this family together. You are my daughter." Keisha pressed a kiss to Fanny's knuckles, her tears falling freely onto the blanket. "Thank you for choosing me, Mama." Finally, Fanny turned her head slightly to look at Maya. The brilliant, fierce lawyer was weeping quietly, her professional armor completely stripped away, leaving only a heartbroken granddaughter. Fanny squeezed Maya's hand with the last ounce of strength she possessed. "Maya," Fanny whispered, her breath hitching. "I'm here, Nana," Maya choked out, leaning closer. "Don't let them tell you that a black woman's strength is her burden," Fanny said, every word a deliberate, monumental effort. "It is not a burden. It is a crown, but a crown is heavy. You don't have to wear it. For people who don't respect the queen. Maya let out a ragged sob, nodding her head. I know. You taught me. I won't let you down. You couldn't, if you tried, Fanny smiled. It was a beautiful, radiant smile. Fanny closed her eyes. She felt a profound, sweeping sense of peace wash over her. She thought about the frightened 65-year-old woman holding a box of poisoned chocolates in a hospital waiting room. That woman felt a lifetime away. She had taken the worst betrayal a human being could experience, and she had spun it into gold. She had won. The room faded. The sounds of her family weeping softly turned into a gentle, rhythmic hum, like the sound of a choir singing far off in the distance. The pain in her joints, the heaviness in her chest, all of it dissolved into light. Fanny Washington exhaled her final breath, and she was free. A week later, the funeral of Fanny Washington was not a quiet affair. It was a royal procession. Hundreds of people packed the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in downtown Atlanta. There were politicians, judges, and community leaders. But taking up the first 10 rows were the women of the Sisterhood Center, wearing bright, vibrant colors, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, just as Fanny had instructed in her will. No black, no mourning, only triumph. Maya stood at the pulpit to deliver the eulogy. She wore an emerald green pantsuit, a deliberate, powerful homage to the armor her grandmother had worn on the day she took her life back. Maya looked out at the sea of faces, her posture impeccably straight, her voice clear and ringing through the massive sanctuary. My grandmother, Fanny Washington, did not live an easy life, Maya began. She was asked to sacrifice. She was asked to bleed. And for a long time she was asked to suffer in silence, as so many women in our community are taught to do. Maya paused, her eyes sweeping across the front rows, meeting the eyes of Ms. Clara, Beatrice, and Ms. Loretta. But Fanny Washington taught us that the greatest act of love is not unconditional submission, Maya continued, her voice rising in power. The greatest act of love is the truth. Sometimes the truth is a warm meal on a Sunday, and sometimes the truth is a closed door. She taught us that we do not have to set ourselves on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. A chorus of amen and speak on it echoed through the church. The man who tried to break her thought she was weak because she was kind, Maya said, her voice dropping into a register of undeniable authority. He did not know that her kindness was a choice, not a condition. When he forced her hand, she did not just defeat him. She built an empire on the ruins of his arrogance. Maya looked up toward the stained glass windows, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. She left us a legacy that cannot be stolen, cannot be poisoned, and cannot be foreclosed upon. She left us our voices. She left us our dignity. So today, we do not mourn the passing of Fanny Washington. We celebrate the eternal harvest of the seeds she planted. Maya stepped down from the pulpit to a thunderous, tearful standing ovation. She walked back to the front pew and took her mother's hand. The cycle of trauma, the quiet desperation that had plagued their family line for generations, was officially, permanently broken. Somewhere in the vast, peaceful expanse of eternity, Fanny Washington was resting. But her spirit, fierce, unyielding, and fiercely loving, was still walking the halls of the center, still fighting in the courtrooms, still whispering in the ears of women who needed the courage to say no. The ties of fragile families may break, but the ties of a sisterhood forged in the truth are immortal. And the legacy of Fanny Washington would echo forever.